The morning sun cast long shadows across the gleaming marble floors of Sterling Financial Tower, one of Manhattan's most prestigious office buildings. At 47 stories high, it housed some of the city's most powerful investment firms, law practices, and corporate headquarters. The building's reputation was built on exclusivity, success, and an unspoken hierarchy that everyone understood and respected. Marcus Williams pushed his cleaning cart through the corridors of the 32nd floor, the soft squeak of its wheels barely audible above the hum of the building's ventilation system. At 53, Marcus had been cleaning these halls for nearly 15 years, arriving each morning at 5:30 to ensure everything was spotless before the white-collar workers arrived. His weathered hands moved with practiced efficiency as he emptied trash bins, wiped down surfaces, and vacuumed the expensive carpets that lined the executive offices. Marcus took pride in his work, though few people seemed to notice. To most of the building's occupants, he was invisible, just another piece of the infrastructure that kept their world running smoothly. He preferred it that way, actually. It allowed him to observe without being observed, to understand the rhythms and relationships that defined this place. Over the years, he had watched young interns grow into executives, witnessed hostile takeovers unfold in hushed conference rooms, and seen careers rise and fall with the brutal efficiency of the financial world. The 32nd floor belonged to Apex Capital Management, a hedge fund that managed billions in assets and commanded respect throughout the financial district. Its founder and CEO, Jonathan Sterling, was a legend in the industry, a man who had built his empire from nothing and now controlled one of the most successful investment firms in the country. At 41, Sterling had already accumulated a fortune that most people could barely comprehend, his net worth hovering somewhere north of $800 million. As Marcus worked his way through the open office area, he could hear the familiar sounds of the workday beginning. Phones rang with increasing frequency, keyboards clicked with urgent intensity, and voices carried the sharp edge of stress that seemed to permeate every conversation in this place. The traders and analysts were already deep into their morning routine, eyes glued to multiple monitors displaying an endless stream of numbers, charts, and market data. Near the reception area, Marcus noticed a small crowd gathering around one of the junior analysts' desks. Sarah Chen, a bright 26-year-old who had joined the firm 6 months earlier, was staring at her computer screen with a look of pure horror. Her face had gone pale, and her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her phone. "What's wrong?" asked David Hernandez, a senior analyst who had taken Sarah under his wing since her arrival. David was one of the few people in the office who had ever acknowledged Marcus with more than a cursory nod, occasionally asking about his weekend or commenting on the weather. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "The Morrison account. I think I made a mistake on the execution order last night." She pointed at her screen, where a trade confirmation showed a transaction for $50 million, 10 times larger than intended. "I think I added an extra zero. This was supposed to be a $5 million position, not $50 million. The color drained from David's face as the implication hit him. A mistake of this magnitude could cost the firm millions, depending on how the market moved. More importantly, it could trigger a regulatory investigation and potentially damage Apex Capital's reputation with one of their most important clients. "How did this happen?" David asked, his voice tight with concern. "I was working late trying to get everything processed before the market opened in Tokyo," Sarah explained, her words coming out in a rush. "I was tired, and I guess I don't know how I didn't catch it. The confirmation email came through this morning, and that's when I realized." Marcus continued his work, but he couldn't help overhearing the conversation. He had seen this kind of mistake before, though rarely on such a large scale. The pressure in this environment was immense, and even the most careful people occasionally cracked under the strain. He felt sympathy for the young woman, remembering his own daughter who was about the same age and working her way up in a similarly demanding field. Word of the error spread quickly through the office, carried by whispered conversations and urgent text messages. Within an hour, it had reached the executive floor, where Jonathan Sterling was reviewing the morning's trading reports in his corner office. The 39th floor was Sterling's domain, a space designed to project power and success. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of Central Park, while the office itself was decorated with modern art and expensive furniture that spoke to both wealth and refined taste. Sterling's assistant, Jennifer Walsh, knocked on his door and entered with obvious reluctance. At 34, Jennifer had worked for Sterling for nearly 7 years, long enough to recognize the warning signs of his legendary temper. She had seen him destroy careers with a single phone call and watched as he reduced grown men to tears during particularly brutal meetings. "Mr. Sterling, we have a situation with the Morrison account," she began, her voice carefully modulated to convey the seriousness without triggering an immediate explosion. Sterling looked up from his reports, his pale blue eyes focusing on Jennifer with laser-like intensity. "What kind of situation?" "There was an execution error on last night's trade. Instead of a $5 million position, we executed $50 million. Jennifer paused, watching as Sterling's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Sarah Chen was responsible for the trade entry. For a moment, Sterling said nothing. His fingers drummed silently on his desk as he processed the information, calculating the potential financial and reputational damage. Morrison Industries was one of Apex Capital's oldest and most valuable clients, representing nearly $200 million in assets under management. Richard Morrison, the company's founder, was notoriously particular about his investments and had little tolerance for mistakes. "Get everyone involved in my office in 10 minutes, Sterling said finally, his voice deadly calm. "Chen, Hernandez, and whoever else touched this trade, and get Morrison on the phone." Jennifer nodded and hurried out, leaving Sterling alone with his thoughts. He stood and walked to his window, looking out at the city below. From this height, the people on the streets looked like ants, scurrying about their business, with no real understanding of the forces that shaped their lives. It was a perspective that Sterling had grown comfortable with over the years. The view from the top, where decisions made in air-conditioned offices could affect thousands of lives and millions of dollars. The meeting that followed was brutal, even by Sterling's standards. Sarah Chen sat trembling in one of the leather chairs facing Sterling's desk, while David Hernandez tried unsuccessfully to deflect some of the blame. 2 other senior executives flanked Sterling, their expressions carefully neutral as they watched their CEO dismantle the junior analyst's confidence piece by piece. $50 million, Sterling repeated for the 3rd time, his voice growing louder with each repetition. "Do you have any idea what $50 million represents to this firm, to our clients, to the reputation we've spent decades building?" Sarah tried to respond, but Sterling cut her off with a sharp gesture. "This isn't just a mistake, Chen. This is professional incompetence of the highest order. You've potentially cost us one of our most important relationships, not to mention the regulatory nightmare this could create." "Sir, I take full responsibility," Sarah managed to say, her voice barely audible. "I'll do whatever it takes to fix this." "Fix this?" Sterling's laugh was harsh and humorless. "You think this is something you can just fix? Morrison is already threatening to pull his entire portfolio. We're looking at a potential loss of $200 million in assets under management, plus whatever regulatory fines might come our way. Your entire career earnings wouldn't cover a fraction of the damage you've caused." David Hernandez shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Mr. Sterling, if I may—" "No, you may not," Sterling snapped, turning his attention to the senior analyst. "This happened on your watch, Hernandez. You're supposed to be supervising the junior staff, making sure they don't make exactly this kind of mistake. As far as I'm concerned, you're just as responsible as she is." The meeting continued for another 20 minutes, with Sterling methodically destroying any remaining confidence or self-respect that Sarah Chen might have possessed. By the time he dismissed them, she was on the verge of tears, and David looked like he was questioning every career decision that had brought him to this moment. As the group filed out of Sterling's office, they made their way back to the 32nd floor in silence. The elevator ride felt eternal, the weight of their professional futures hanging heavy in the air. When the doors opened, they were greeted by the curious stares of their colleagues, all of whom had heard rumors about the morning's events. Sarah went directly to her desk and began gathering her personal belongings, assuming that her termination was imminent. David tried to offer words of comfort, but they both knew that in the ruthless world of high finance, mistakes of this magnitude were rarely forgiven. It was at this moment that Marcus Williams entered the picture in a way that no one could have anticipated. He had been cleaning the conference room adjacent to the main work area when he overheard Sarah on the phone with what sounded like her mother, explaining through tears that she would probably be fired and might have to move back home. The conversation was heartbreaking in its raw vulnerability, a young woman's dreams crashing down around her because of a single moment of fatigue-induced carelessness. Marcus remembered his own daughter, Eleanor, who had struggled through her own early career challenges. Elena was now a successful engineer in California, but there had been times when a single mistake could have derailed everything she had worked for. The memory of those difficult years stirred something in Marcus, a sense of protective instinct that he hadn't felt in a long time. As he continued his work, Marcus found himself thinking about the dynamics he had observed in this building over the years. He had watched Sterling operate, had seen the man's capacity for both brilliance and cruelty. He had also seen the fear that Sterling inspired in his employees, the way grown professionals would second-guess themselves and lose sleep over relatively minor issues. But Marcus had also observed something else about Sterling, something that most people missed because they were too intimidated to look closely. Beneath the polished exterior and ruthless business persona, Marcus had occasionally glimpsed moments of genuine uncertainty, times when Sterling seemed to be acting out a role rather than expressing his true nature. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Marcus had learned to read people during his years of invisible observation. The rest of the morning passed in a tense atmosphere of whispered conversations and nervous energy. Word had spread throughout the building about the Morrison account incident, and everyone was waiting to see how Sterling would handle the fallout. Some were placing bets on how quickly Sarah Chen would be terminated, while others speculated about whether David Hernandez would survive the scandal. Meanwhile, Sterling spent the morning in damage control mode, fielding calls from regulatory officials and trying to reassure other major clients that Apex Capital's operational procedures remained sound. The Morrison account situation was becoming more complicated by the hour, with the client demanding not just an explanation, but concrete assurances that such an error would never happen again. By lunchtime, Sterling's frustration had reached a boiling point. He had been forced to grovel to Richard Morrison, accepting a reduction in management fees and agreeing to enhanced oversight procedures that would constrain his firm's operational flexibility. The entire situation felt like a humiliation, a public demonstration that even someone of his stature was not immune to the consequences of his employees' incompetence. It was in this state of barely controlled rage that Sterling encountered Marcus Williams in the executive elevator bank. Marcus was transporting a large cart of cleaning supplies to the upper floors, moving with his usual quiet efficiency. Under normal circumstances, Sterling wouldn't have even noticed the janitor's presence, but his heightened emotional state made him hypersensitive to anything that might trigger additional frustration. The elevator arrived, and both men stepped inside. Marcus positioned his cart carefully to avoid taking up too much space, but the confined area still felt cramped with both the cart and Sterling's imposing presence. As the elevator began its ascent, Sterling's phone rang with yet another call from a concerned client. The conversation was tense and demanding, with Sterling forced to repeatedly apologize and provide reassurances that felt increasingly hollow. As he spoke, Marcus continued his quiet work, organizing his supplies and preparing for the tasks ahead. But something about the janitor's presence began to grate on Sterling's already frayed nerves. Perhaps it was the contrast between his own high-stress situation and Marcus's apparent calm. Perhaps it was the reminder that while Sterling was dealing with a crisis that could cost millions, Marcus's biggest concern was probably whether he had enough cleaning solution to last the day. Or perhaps it was simply the fact that Marcus represented everything Sterling had worked to rise above: manual labor, anonymity, and a life of service to others rather than command over them. When Sterling's phone call ended, the elevator had reached the 37th floor. As the doors opened and Marcus began to maneuver his cart out, one of the wheels caught on the elevator's threshold. The cart lurched slightly, causing a bottle of cleaning solution to fall and roll towards Sterling's expensive Italian leather shoes. The bottle didn't actually hit Sterling, and no cleaning solution spilled, but something about the near miss triggered an explosion of anger that had been building all morning. All of Sterling's frustration, humiliation, and fear crystallized in that moment into a white-hot rage directed at the man who represented everything he despised about weakness and failure. "Are you kidding me right now?" Sterling's voice echoed through the elevator bank, loud enough to draw attention from the nearby offices. "Do you have any idea how much these shoes cost? How much this suit costs? Are you too stupid to control your own equipment?" Marcus stopped and turned, his expression calm and composed despite the unexpected verbal assault. "I'm sorry, sir. The wheel just caught on the—" "I don't want to hear your excuses," Sterling continued, his voice growing louder and more vicious. "This is exactly the kind of incompetence that's destroying this company. People who can't do the simplest jobs correctly, who can't even push a cart without creating problems." By now, several employees had emerged from their offices to see what was causing the commotion. Sterling was beyond caring about appearances, lost in a fury that felt almost therapeutic after the morning's humiliations. Here, finally, was someone he could dominate completely, someone who couldn't fight back or threaten his position. "Do you understand what's at stake here?" Sterling demanded, stepping closer to Marcus. "Do you have any comprehension of the level of responsibility and pressure that people like me deal with every day? While you're mindlessly pushing your little cart around, I'm managing hundreds of millions of dollars and making decisions that affect thousands of jobs." Marcus remained silent, his dark eyes studying Sterling's face with an intensity that might have been unnerving if Sterling hadn't been so consumed with his own outrage. "People like you don't understand what it takes to build something meaningful," Sterling continued, gesturing dismissively at Marcus's uniform and cart. "You just show up, do your simple little tasks, and go home without ever having to worry about real consequences or real responsibility. You live in a world where the biggest crisis is running out of toilet paper or missing a spot while mopping." The crowd of onlookers had grown larger, with employees from multiple floors now witnessing Sterling's tirade. Some looked uncomfortable with the public humiliation being inflicted on Marcus, while others watched with the morbid fascination that people reserve for car accidents and other disasters. "This is what's wrong with society," Sterling declared, his voice carrying clearly through the corridor. "Too many people content to stay at the bottom, to never aspire to anything greater than manual labor and service jobs. No ambition, no vision, no understanding of what it means to create value or build wealth." Marcus finally spoke, his voice quiet but carrying clearly in the sudden silence that followed Sterling's rant. "You're absolutely right, Mr. Sterling." The unexpected agreement seemed to deflate some of Sterling's momentum. He had been prepared for defensiveness, excuses, or sullen acceptance, but not this calm acknowledgement. "I'm just a janitor," Marcus continued, his tone conversational and matter-of-fact. I do push a cart around and clean up after other people. I don't manage millions of dollars or make decisions that affect thousands of jobs. You're correct about all of that." Sterling nodded, unsure where this was going, but pleased that his points were being acknowledged. "But there's something you should know about this particular janitor," Marcus said, reaching into his shirt pocket and pulling out his wallet. From it, he extracted a business card and handed it to Sterling. "My name is Marcus Williams, and while I do work as a custodian here, I'm also the founder and majority shareholder of Williams Construction and Development." Sterling glanced at the card, and his expression began to change as he read the company name. Williams Construction was one of the largest privately held construction firms in the Northeast, responsible for dozens of major projects throughout New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. "You might have heard of some of our recent projects," Marcus continued in the same calm tone. "The Hudson Yards residential complex, the renovation of Penn Station, the new Brooklyn waterfront development. We employ about 15,000 people across our various divisions." The corridor had become completely silent, except for Marcus's voice, which seemed to carry with unusual clarity in the hushed space. "The interesting thing about the construction business is that it teaches you to pay attention to details that other people miss," Marcus said. "When you're building a skyscraper, you can't afford to ignore the foundation just because it's not visible from the street. You learn that the people doing the so-called simple work, the welders, the electricians, the plumbers, are often the ones who determine whether your project succeeds or fails." Sterling's face had gone pale as the implications of Marcus's revelation began to sink in. Several employees were now pulling out their phones, some probably looking up Williams Construction to verify what they were hearing. "I started working as a janitor here 15 years ago for a very specific reason," Marcus continued. "I wanted to understand how buildings like this actually function on a day-to-day basis. You see, Mr. Sterling, my company built this tower. We poured the foundation, installed the electrical systems, and handled every aspect of the construction process. But I realized that building something and truly understanding how it works are two different things." Marcus gestured toward the expensive marble floors and gleaming fixtures that surrounded them. "So, I took a job as a custodian to learn how a building like this really operates, how the traffic patterns work, where the infrastructure stress points are, what kinds of maintenance issues arise over time. It's been an invaluable education." Sterling opened his mouth to speak, but Marcus wasn't finished. "During these 15 years, I've had the opportunity to observe a lot of different management styles and corporate cultures," Marcus said. "I've seen companies that treat their employees with respect and dignity, and I've seen companies that operate on fear and intimidation. I've watched some organizations build lasting success through collaboration and mutual support, while others create short-term profits through exploitation and domination." The weight of Marcus's words was beginning to settle over the crowd, and Sterling could sense the shift in the room's energy. What had started as his moment of dominance was rapidly becoming something else entirely. "The young woman who made the mistake this morning, Sarah Chen, she's been working 16-hour days for the past month trying to prove herself in this company," Marcus said. "I've seen her here at midnight, double-checking her work and preparing for the next day. I've watched her come in on weekends to review client files and study market trends. She's not incompetent, Mr. Sterling. She's exhausted." Marcus paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "And David Hernandez, who you blamed for not supervising her closely enough. He's been mentoring 3 junior analysts while handling his own full workload because your company hasn't hired adequate support staff. He stays late every night to review their work, not because he's required to, but because he cares about their development and success." Sterling's hands had begun to tremble slightly, though whether from anger, embarrassment, or something else was unclear. "As for your comments about people like me not understanding pressure or responsibility," Marcus said, "I appreciate the perspective. It's true that my daily concerns as a janitor are relatively simple. But as the CEO of a 15,000 employee company, I deal with a slightly different set of pressures. Marcus reached into his pocket again and pulled out his phone. Would you like to know what my net worth is, Mr. Sterling? Because I have a feeling it might surprise you. The question hung in the air like a challenge, but Sterling found himself unable to respond. Williams Construction and Development is valued at approximately $2.3 billion, Marcus said matter-of-factly. My personal net worth, including real estate holdings and investment portfolios, is roughly $1.8 billion. So while I respect your achievements and your $800 million fortune, I hope you'll understand that your lecture about wealth creation and business success felt a bit misplaced. The silence that followed was deafening. Sterling could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears as the full scope of his humiliation became clear. He had just spent 10 minutes lecturing a billionaire about business success while treating him like a servant. But Marcus wasn't done. The reason I'm telling you this isn't to embarrass you, Mr. Sterling, though I understand that's probably the effect. I'm telling you because I want you to understand something important about leadership and success. Marcus stepped closer, his voice dropping to a more intimate level that somehow carried even more authority than his previous statements. True wealth, real, lasting success, isn't built by humiliating people or crushing their spirits when they make mistakes. It's built by creating environments where talented people can do their best work, where errors are treated as learning opportunities rather than character flaws, and where everyone feels valued regardless of their position in the hierarchy. Marcus gestured toward Sarah Chen's desk, which was visible through the glass partition that separated the elevator bank from the main office area. That young woman has the potential to be exceptional at this work, but only if she's given the support and guidance she needs to grow. Instead, you've just destroyed her confidence and probably convinced her that she's not cut out for this industry. That's not leadership, Mr. Sterling, that's waste. Sterling finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. I didn't know. Of course you didn't know, Marcus replied, his tone becoming slightly more gentle. How could you? You've spent so many years focused on maintaining your position at the top of the hierarchy that you've forgotten how to see the people around you as human beings rather than just resources to be managed or obstacles to be overcome. Marcus picked up the business card that Sterling had dropped and placed it back in his wallet. I've been studying your operation for 15 years, Mr. Sterling. I know more about how this company functions than probably anyone except you. And I can tell you with certainty that your biggest problems aren't caused by incompetent employees or inadequate systems. They're caused by a culture of fear that prevents people from doing their best work. The crowd of onlookers had grown even larger, with employees from multiple floors now witnessing this unprecedented reversal of fortune. Many were recording the encounter on their phones, realizing that they were watching something that would be talked about for years to come. When people are terrified of making mistakes, they become paralyzed, Marcus continued. They spend more time covering their tracks and protecting themselves than they do focusing on excellence. They work longer hours, not because the work requires it, but because they're afraid of being seen as inadequate. That's not a recipe for success, Mr. Sterling. That's a recipe for burnout and eventual failure. Sterling looked around at the faces surrounding him, seeing his employees in a way he hadn't in years. For the first time, he noticed the tension in their expressions, the way they held themselves as if constantly braced for attack. He saw the fear that Marcus was describing, and he realized that he had been the primary architect of that fear. What do you want from me? Sterling asked, his voice hollow. I want you to remember what you were like before you became successful, Marcus replied. I want you to remember what it felt like to be vulnerable, to make mistakes, to need guidance and support from others, because until you can reconnect with that part of yourself, you'll never be the leader your company needs. Marcus began pushing his cart toward the service elevator, but he paused before leaving. "Mr. Sterling, I want you to think about Sarah Chen, not as an employee who made a mistake, but as someone's daughter who came to work today believing in herself and her future. Ask yourself what kind of leader you want to be, the kind who destroys that belief or the kind who helps her rebuild it stronger than before." With that, Marcus disappeared into the service elevator, leaving Sterling alone with his thoughts and the dozens of witnesses to his humiliation. The aftermath of the encounter spread through the building like wildfire. Within hours, videos of Sterling's confrontation with Marcus were circulating on social media, accompanied by breathless commentary about the billionaire janitor who had put an arrogant CEO in his place. News outlets picked up the story, and by evening, it had become a viral sensation that was being discussed on financial news programs and late-night talk shows. For Sterling, the immediate concern was damage control. His company's reputation was already fragile due to the Morrison account incident, and this public humiliation threatened to accelerate the loss of client confidence. Several major investors called to express concern about Sterling's judgment and leadership style, while others began quietly exploring alternatives for their portfolios. But perhaps more troubling than the immediate business implications was the effect the encounter had on Sterling's sense of himself. For the first time in years, he was forced to confront the possibility that his approach to leadership was fundamentally flawed. The respect and fear he had worked so hard to cultivate suddenly felt hollow and destructive rather than powerful and effective. Meanwhile, Sarah Chen found herself at the center of an unexpected outpouring of support. Colleagues who had previously maintained professional distance began reaching out to offer encouragement and assistance. Several senior employees shared their own stories of early career mistakes and the mentors who had helped them recover and grow. David Hernandez, emboldened by Marcus's defense of his work, began advocating more forcefully for changes in the company's management practices. He proposed implementing formal mentorship programs, reducing excessive overtime expectations, and creating clearer guidelines for handling errors and setbacks. The Morrison account situation, which had seemed like a career-ending disaster that morning, was ultimately resolved through a combination of Sterling's willingness to accept reduced fees and Richard Morrison's recognition that the mistake had been an isolated incident rather than a systemic problem. The client relationship survived, though with enhanced oversight procedures that served as a constant reminder of the incident. As the weeks passed, Sterling found himself grappling with questions he hadn't considered in years. What kind of leader did he want to be? What kind of legacy did he want to leave? Was his current approach sustainable, or was he building a house of cards that would eventually collapse under the weight of its own contradictions? The answers didn't come easily, and Sterling's initial attempts at change were awkward and inconsistent. He struggled to find the balance between maintaining authority and creating the more supportive environment that Marcus had described. Some employees remained skeptical of his motives, while others welcomed any sign of progress toward a healthier workplace culture. Sarah Chen, for her part, threw herself into her work with renewed determination. The support she had received from colleagues, combined with Marcus's public defense of her character, had restored much of her confidence. She implemented new double-checking procedures for large trades and became an advocate for systemic changes that would prevent similar errors in the future. 3 months after the elevator encounter, Sterling received an unexpected phone call. Marcus Williams was inviting him to lunch at one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants, a gesture that Sterling interpreted as either an olive branch or a power play. Either way, he knew he couldn't refuse. The lunch was held at Le Bernardin, a Michelin-starred restaurant known for its discretion and sophisticated clientele. Sterling arrived early, despite his usual practice of keeping others waiting, and was surprised to find Marcus already seated at a corner table that offered privacy from the other diners. Marcus had traded his janitor's uniform for an expertly tailored navy suit that probably cost more than most people made in a month. The transformation was startling, highlighting just how completely Sterling had misjudged the man he had encountered in the elevator. This version of Marcus Williams looked every inch the billionaire CEO, commanding respect through presence rather than demanding it through intimidation. "Thank you for coming," Marcus said as Sterling approached the table. His tone was warm but professional, suggesting that while the meeting was friendly, it was also serious business. Sterling took his seat, still uncertain about Marcus's intentions. "I have to admit, I'm curious about why you wanted to meet." "Several reasons," Marcus replied, signaling the waiter to bring menus. "First, I wanted to apologize for the public nature of our previous encounter. While I stand by everything I said, I recognize that humiliating you in front of your employees wasn't the most constructive approach." Sterling was surprised by the apology, having expected either gloating or additional lecturing. "I appreciate that, though I think we both know I had it coming." "Perhaps," Marcus agreed with a slight smile, "but effective leadership sometimes requires making difficult points in private rather than public forums. I let my emotions get the better of me, which is something I usually try to avoid." They ordered their meals, and Marcus began explaining his broader perspective on the incident. "The second reason I wanted to meet is to discuss a business proposition that might interest you." Sterling raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. "Williams Construction is expanding into commercial real estate development," Marcus explained. "We're planning a series of mixed-use projects throughout the Northeast that will require significant financial backing and investment management. The projects represent approximately $4 billion in total development value." The numbers were staggering, representing the kind of opportunity that could transform Apex Capital's growth trajectory overnight. "I've been researching investment firms that might be suitable partners for these projects," Marcus continued. "Firms with the expertise and resources to handle complex financial structures while maintaining the ethical standards that are important to my company's brand." Sterling found himself leaning forward, his business instincts overriding his personal discomfort. "What kind of partnership are you envisioning?" "Full-service investment management for the development projects, plus ongoing portfolio management for Williams Construction's corporate investments," Marcus replied. "The management fees alone would represent approximately $40 million annually, with performance bonuses that could double that amount." Sterling's mind raced through the implications. A partnership of this magnitude would not only restore Apex Capital's reputation, but position it as one of the premier investment firms in the region. The relationship with Marcus Williams would open doors to other high-net-worth clients and establish the firm's credibility in the ultra-wealthy market segment. "But there are conditions," Marcus added, his tone becoming more serious. Sterling had expected as much. "What kind of conditions?" "The partnership would require a fundamental change in how Apex Capital treats its employees," Marcus said. "I need to be confident that any firm representing my interests shares my values regarding workplace culture and employee development." Marcus pulled out a tablet and showed Sterling a detailed proposal that outlined specific requirements for employee satisfaction metrics, professional development programs, and management training initiatives. The conditions were extensive and would require significant changes to how the firm operated. "These aren't suggestions, Mr. Sterling," Marcus clarified. "They're non-negotiable requirements. My company's reputation is built on treating people with respect and dignity, and I can't afford to be associated with an organization that operates differently." Sterling studied the proposal, recognizing both the opportunity and the challenge it represented. The financial benefits were enormous, but the changes required would force him to abandon many of the management practices that he had relied on throughout his career. "Why are you offering this to me?" Sterling asked. Given our history, it would be easier to work with a different firm. Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering his response. Because I believe in second chances, and because I think you have the potential to be a much better leader than you've been. The question is whether you're willing to do the work required to get there. The conversation continued over the course of a 2-hour lunch, during which Marcus outlined his vision for a more collaborative and supportive business environment. He shared examples from his own company's practices, describing how employee satisfaction and business success could be mutually reinforcing rather than competing priorities. Sterling found himself genuinely engaged with the ideas, recognizing their potential value even as he struggled with the personal changes they would require. The old Sterling would have dismissed such concepts as weak or naive, but his recent experiences had forced him to question many of his previous assumptions about leadership and success. As the lunch concluded, Marcus extended his hand to Sterling. "I'll give you 30 days to consider the proposal. If you decide to move forward, I'll expect to see concrete evidence of the cultural changes we've discussed. Not just policy modifications, but genuine shifts in how you and your senior team interact with employees." Sterling shook Marcus's hand, feeling both excited and terrified by the opportunity before him. "What if I can't change? What if this is just who I am?" Marcus smiled, an expression that transformed his entire face. "Mr. Sterling, 15 years ago, I was a successful but relatively small-time contractor who thought the only way to succeed was to work longer and harder than everyone else. The idea of building a billion-dollar company while maintaining work-life balance for my employees would have seemed impossible to me then." Marcus stood to leave, but paused for one final comment. "Change is possible, but only if you want it badly enough to do the difficult work of examining your own assumptions and behaviors. The question isn't whether you can change, it's whether you will." With that, Marcus left Sterling alone with his thoughts and a decision that would determine not just his company's future, but his own legacy as a leader. The 30 days that followed were among the most challenging of Sterling's professional life. He began by meeting individually with every employee at Apex Capital, starting with Sarah Chen and David Hernandez. The conversations were awkward and often painful, forcing him to confront the fear and resentment that his management style had created. Sarah Chen's meeting was particularly difficult. Sterling had to acknowledge the damage his outburst had caused, while also recognizing her genuine talent and potential. He implemented new error handling procedures that emphasized learning over punishment, and he assigned David Hernandez as Sarah's formal mentor with dedicated time for training and development. David Hernandez proved to be an invaluable ally in Sterling's transformation efforts. His years of experience and natural coaching abilities made him an ideal liaison between Sterling and the junior staff. Together, they developed new management protocols that emphasized communication, support, and continuous improvement rather than criticism and fear. The changes weren't just procedural. They required Sterling to fundamentally alter his daily interactions with employees. Instead of ruling through intimidation and outbursts, he had to learn to provide constructive feedback, offer support during challenging situations, and acknowledge his own mistakes when they occurred. The process was humbling and often frustrating. Sterling discovered that many of his employees had been operating far below their potential, not because they lacked ability, but because they were too afraid of making mistakes to take initiative or suggest improvements. As the culture began to shift, he started seeing creative solutions and innovative ideas that had been suppressed by the previous environment of fear. Financial performance, which Sterling had worried might suffer during the transition, actually improved as employees became more engaged and productive. The reduced stress and improved morale led to better decision-making, more effective collaboration, and increased client satisfaction. 2 weeks before Marcus's deadline, Sterling received an unexpected visitor. Richard Morrison, the client whose account had triggered the entire chain of events, requested a meeting to discuss expanding his relationship with Apex Capital. "I've been hearing interesting things about the changes you're making here," Morrison explained during their meeting. "My contacts in the industry are talking about a different atmosphere at your firm, more collaborative and innovative. That's the kind of culture I want managing my investments." Morrison not only agreed to maintain his existing portfolio with Apex Capital, but added an additional $50 million in new investments. The success reinforced Sterling's growing conviction that Marcus's approach to leadership was not just morally superior, but also more effective from a business standpoint. On the day of Marcus's deadline, Sterling called to arrange another meeting. This time, he suggested they meet at Apex Capital's offices, wanting Marcus to see the changes that had been implemented. Marcus arrived wearing his janitor's uniform, a deliberate choice that wasn't lost on Sterling. As they toured the office, Marcus observed the transformed atmosphere. Employees who looked relaxed and engaged, conversations that seemed collaborative rather than tense, and a general sense of energy and purpose that had been absent during his years of observation. "The changes are impressive," Marcus acknowledged as they concluded the tour, "but I'm curious about the sustainability. What happens when you face the next crisis or major challenge?" Sterling had anticipated the question. "I think the real test will be whether we can maintain these standards under pressure. But I'm committed to the approach, not just because of our potential partnership, but because I've seen how much more effective it is." Marcus studied Sterling's face, looking for signs of insincerity or calculation. What he saw was a man who had been genuinely transformed by the process of examining his own leadership style and its effects on others. "There's one more thing I need you to understand," Marcus said. "This partnership isn't just about the money or the business opportunities. It's about building something that will last beyond our individual careers. I want to create a model for how successful businesses can operate with both profitability and humanity." Sterling nodded, finally understanding the broader vision that Marcus had been describing. "I'm ready to be part of that." Marcus smiled and extended his hand. "Then let's get started." The partnership between Williams Construction and Apex Capital was announced 6 months later, generating significant attention in both the financial and construction industries. The collaboration was praised as an innovative approach to large-scale development projects, combining Marcus's construction expertise with Sterling's financial acumen. But for those who knew the full story, the real innovation was in the workplace culture that had emerged from their unlikely encounter. Both companies became case studies in business schools, demonstrating how effective leadership could create environments where financial success and employee satisfaction were mutually supportive rather than competing goals. Sarah Chen was promoted to senior analyst within a year, her confidence and skills having flourished under the new management approach. She became an advocate for the mentorship programs that had been instrumental in her development, eventually taking on responsibility for training new hires. David Hernandez was promoted to managing director, with specific responsibility for maintaining the cultural standards that had transformed the company. His natural coaching abilities and deep understanding of the firm's evolution made him an ideal guardian of the new approach. Sterling himself continued to evolve as a leader, working with executive coaches and attending leadership development programs to refine his skills. The transformation wasn't always smooth. Old habits occasionally resurfaced under stress, but the overall trajectory was consistently positive. Marcus continued working as a janitor at Sterling Financial Tower for another 2 years, though his role gradually shifted from observation to consultation. He became an informal advisor to several companies in the building, helping them develop more effective and humane management practices. The story of their encounter became legendary in business circles, often cited as an example of how preconceptions and hierarchical thinking can blind leaders to the talent and wisdom that exists throughout their organizations. It was also frequently referenced in discussions about the importance of treating all employees with respect and dignity, regardless of their position or status. 5 years after their first confrontation, Sterling and Marcus were featured together on the cover of Fortune magazine in an article about innovative leadership approaches. The photo showed them standing in the lobby of Sterling Financial Tower, surrounded by employees from both companies who had participated in their joint mentorship and development programs. The article described how their partnership had become a model for other business relationships, demonstrating that success could be achieved without sacrificing the human values that make work meaningful and sustainable. It highlighted the improved employee satisfaction scores, reduced turnover rates, and enhanced financial performance that had resulted from their collaborative approach. But perhaps the most telling moment came during the photo shoot when Sarah Chen, now a vice president at Apex Capital, was asked to comment on the changes she had witnessed. "The amazing thing isn't just that Mr. Sterling learned to be a better leader," she said. "It's that he created an environment where all of us could become better at what we do. When people feel valued and supported, they don't just work harder. They work smarter, more creatively, and with a sense of purpose that benefits everyone." Her words captured the essence of what Marcus had been trying to teach Sterling in that elevator encounter years earlier. That true leadership isn't about dominance or intimidation, but about creating conditions where everyone can contribute their best work and grow into their full potential. The transformation of Sterling and his company became a powerful reminder that change is possible at any stage of a career or organization's development. It showed that even the most entrenched patterns of behavior can be altered when leaders are willing to examine their assumptions, acknowledge their mistakes, and commit to doing the difficult work of genuine growth and improvement. As Marcus finally retired from his janitorial position to focus full-time on his construction empire, he left behind an environment that had been fundamentally transformed by his presence and wisdom. The lessons he had taught through his years of patient observation and his moment of public confrontation continued to shape the culture of Sterling Financial Tower long after his departure. The story served as a reminder that wisdom and insight can come from unexpected sources, and that the hierarchies we create in our professional lives often blind us to the valuable perspectives that exist throughout our organizations. It demonstrated that true success requires not just financial acumen and technical skills, but also the emotional intelligence and human decency that make collaborative achievement possible. Sterling's journey from an intimidating autocrat to a respected collaborative leader became a testament to the power of second chances and the possibility of genuine personal transformation. His willingness to acknowledge his mistakes, learn from someone he had initially dismissed, and commit to sustained change created ripple effects that extended far beyond his own company. The partnership between Marcus and Sterling continued to thrive, built on a foundation of mutual respect, shared values, and a common commitment to proving that business success and human dignity could coexist and reinforce each other. Their story became a powerful example of how a single moment of moral courage, Marcus's decision to speak truth to power, could catalyze changes that benefit everyone involved. In the end, the encounter between the millionaire and the janitor became much more than a viral moment or a cautionary tale about the dangers of arrogance. It became a blueprint for transformation, demonstrating that even the most successful people can learn, grow, and become better versions of themselves when they encounter the right combination of challenge and support. The office that had once been ruled by fear and intimidation became a place where creativity flourished, where mistakes were treated as learning opportunities, and where every employee felt valued and empowered to contribute their best work. It stood as proof that Marcus's vision of ethical business practices wasn't just idealistic, it was practical, profitable, and sustainable in ways that traditional command and control approaches could never match.